Day 17 in the Lindsay Clancy trial was very short. Only one witness took the stand, so we'll go over her testimony in detail, and then we'll discuss the crowd that was outside and the discussion that the attorneys had with the judge after the jury was excused for the day. The defense called Sheila Kavanaugh, a board-certified chaplain from Brigham and Women's Hospital. She first met Lindsay Clancy on January 25, 2023, so just one day after the children were murdered. She described the hospital being filled with law enforcement and hospital security, and she said that Lindsay was in very serious condition. She was intubated, wearing a neck brace, covered in bandages, and connected to extensive medical equipment. Kavanaugh saw her again the next day, and Lindsay was still intubated, so she could not speak. The first time they were able to have a discussion was on January 31st. Kavanaugh said Lindsay had a very flat, neutral affect, and she vividly remembers the first thing that Lindsay said to her, quote, "I am so glad my children are safe." Kavanaugh said she responded to Lindsay from a theological perspective, telling her that her children were safe in heaven with God. The two then prayed together. And then came the biggest part of her testimony. Kavanaugh said that Lindsay told her about hearing a voice. According to Kavanaugh, Lindsay described it as a persistent male voice, and that voice told her that if she did not follow its commands, neither her nor her children would be safe. Kavanaugh testified that this was not something Lindsay only mentioned once. She visited Lindsay 14 times while she was at Brigham, and the voice conversation came up multiple times during those visits. After Lindsay was transferred to Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital, Kavanaugh continued visiting her. And when Lindsay later went to Tewksbury State Hospital, those visits continued on just about a weekly basis. Kavanaugh estimated that she visited Lindsay at Tewksbury around 200 times. She testified that Lindsay frequently talks about her children, that she loves them deeply, and she carries immense grief that continues into the present day. The Commonwealth's cross-examination of this witness focused primarily on something that some people may consider a pretty big problem with her testimony about that voice. She never documented it. The prosecutor went through Kavanaugh's chaplain notes and pointed out that despite Lindsay supposedly discussing this voice several times, there is no mention of a voice anywhere in those notes. The witness explained that chaplain notes are not verbatim transcripts of conversations, and she said that her role is not to medically evaluate patients and that conversations with the chaplain take place in an atmosphere of trust and confidentiality. But the Commonwealth pushed back by showing that her notes did contain other specific statements from Lindsay. For example, Kavanaugh documented Lindsay's fear of not being able to walk again. Her notes also described Lindsay as hopeful about her physical progress, hopeful about eventually being transferred to Spalding, and on one occasion feeling that she was deserving of this in light of what had happened. So the prosecution's point was these notes contained substantial details about other things Lindsay had said, her thoughts, her feelings, and some of her exact words, but nothing was documented about this male voice. On redirect, Attorney Reddington tried to draw a line of distinction between Kavanaugh's observations of Lindsay and conversations that she would have considered confidential spiritual communications. But when the prosecutor questioned her again, Kavanaugh clarified that she was not actually prohibited from putting a patient's words into the medical record. She used her own judgment about what to include. There were a couple of other things covered on cross. Kavanaugh said she did not recall Lindsay telling her about using a yellow exercise band during physical therapy at Spalding. She also said Lindsay did not discuss the fact that she had applied for SSDI benefits with her. The Commonwealth also challenged Kavanaugh's description of the large law enforcement presence she saw when she first arrived. Kavanaugh acknowledged that hospital security was separate from law enforcement, that she did not know a search warrant was being executed that day, and that she only recalled 2 officers being stationed directly outside Lindsay's room at a time. And that was the only testimony for day 17. It was a very short day, but the judge told the jurors not to make any assumptions or speculate as to why the court day was so short, so I will ask you to do the same. Now let's talk about a couple of other things. There was a pretty large crowd outside of the courthouse today. Here is one photo of that, and one more photo. I would like to know your thoughts on that crowd. And here's a view from inside the courtroom. Once the jury was excused, the attorney stayed behind to speak with the judge about the possible jury instructions that they will receive when it is time for them to deliberate. I'm going to tell you what each side said, but I want you to look at that photo. For quite a long time while the Commonwealth was speaking, Lindsay was looking at the prosecutor as you see her looking at her there. So tell me your thoughts on that. The Commonwealth asked for instructions on first and second degree murder, including deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity or cruelty, along with consciousness of guilt. Prosecutors argued that the jury should not receive an intoxication instruction, saying there was no evidence that Lindsay was intoxicated from medication at the time of these killings. The defense strongly disagreed and argued that this is an involuntary intoxication issue because of the prescribed medications, alleged side effects, medication changes, and withdrawals. Reddington also asked the judge to allow the jury to consider involuntary manslaughter as a lesser offense and a wanton conduct instruction. The Commonwealth argued involuntary manslaughter does not apply because its position is that the evidence shows specific intent to cause death. The defense also asked the judge not to give jurors a simplified checklist of the elements. Judge Sullivan said he generally does not use that type of chart anyway, but does normally give every juror a complete written copy of the jury instructions. He plans to give both sides a rough draft of those instructions tomorrow, and none of those disputed issues have been decided yet, so we will see what the jury will be instructed on. They also discussed the schedule. It is sounding like testimony of witnesses and even rebuttal witnesses could wrap up as soon as tomorrow or maybe Monday, and then we'll have closing arguments maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, but this trial should be coming to an end soon, and the jury will be allowed to deliberate their opinion. I am personally glad to see this almost coming to a close. I feel this trial has brought out many things in many people. So let me know your thoughts on day 17. I will be back with a day 18 recap after the trial testimony wraps up tomorrow. And until then, and most importantly, rest in peace to the 3 children at the center of this case and the 3 names that should be said more than anyone else's in this case: Cora, Dawson, and Callan Clancy.